All right, before we start, let me just share my screen. And then after I share my screen, we'll just have a very brief word of prayer before we go right in. And, all right, let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I'd like to thank you, Lord, for blessing us with the opportunity to gather once again, Lord. You have said in your word where two or three are gathered, you're there with the message. I know that we're definitely here residing within us, Lord. Pray that even as we go through the study of the word on this topic of the Hall of Faith, looking at the lives of both Barak and Samson, I ask that you just give us your Holy Spirit to be able to rightly divide your word of truth, just to be able to really understand how both of these characters' stories resonate with us in terms of how we should be able to actually carry out faith in a proper manner, Lord. And be with us that are currently here and be with anybody else that's going to study in the future. May I pray to these things. All right. So, as I mentioned my prayer, as you can see on the screen, the study today is about Barak and Samson. Before I even begin, because I feel like Samson's a character that I know more. When you think of Barak, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Sorry, say that again. When I think of Barak,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm actually not familiar with that name.
I thought it was just me. I'm genuinely not familiar with the story of Barak.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm
Alam, but not Barak.
like normally when you think of like the topic of faith, but like Samson isn't one of particular, like the one is not the first one that comes up either.
Definitely resonate with that. But I
So,
guess we're gonna see how exactly it plays out. So just all right. So the main text this is based on is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32 to 34. But obviously we're gonna have special, I believe, on verse 32. So I'll just go ahead and read it. It says, "And what more shall I say? The time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, and turned to flight the armies of the aliens." We're just going to quickly just go into Barak, who it wasn't really until today, and I believe maybe another time when I think when I was going through a reading plan, I actually started to get a bit more familiarized with the story. So the Hebrew name Barak, because we know that the Bible was written in Old Testament being Hebrew and the New Testament Greek. The Hebrew name Barak actually means lightning, um, and kind of interesting that it actually means that because as we understand it from maybe studying key stage two science or science or just studying science in general, maybe you're just somebody that's just interested in nature and how the world works. You see the fact that lightning is actually it's a giant spark of electricity in the atmosphere that sometimes goes between clouds, the air, and obviously in other instances it actually strikes the ground. And what I find so interesting about it is the fact that I did a bit of research into this. I found out something that was quite interesting in that without thunderstorms and also without lightning, the Earth's atmosphere, in terms of its electrical balance, would actually disappear in 5 minutes. And also, lightning also makes ozone producing chemicals. So even though I guess when you think of lightning, you think of thunder and all these different types of weather systems. You just think of stuff that just causes a great disruption. But we see the fact that lightning can actually cause something to actually come to life, can actually bring life into a particular situation. I don't know what you guys thought about that. I didn't really know about lightning. I just assumed lightning's not a good thing. What do you guys think about that? Because I didn't know that about lightning. I guess you don't have any difference of opinion about lightning apart from what's on the screen. apart from what I've said, rather?
No.
Okay. All right. No worries. I thought maybe because obviously I didn't. Last time I studied science was many years ago, so I thought maybe you had more in-depth understanding of light.
No. I just know lightning doesn't come without thunder.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
And was it lightning travels faster than thunder? Because light travels faster than sound.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
That's right.
All right. So the first story we're going to deal with is that of Barak. If you turn your Bibles, or whatever you're using your Bible, as you know, your phone, that physical. Judges chapter 4, verse 6 to 24. Long text. So if anything, I'll read the very of it, and then you guys can read the rest of it. It really starts off in Judges chapter 4, verse 1, but just to kind of put things into perspective. So if anyone's really looked at the book of Judges, and looked at the story of the Israelites, when you survey the story of the Israelites from the time that they actually were taken out of Egypt, we see the fact that, you know, God is actually trying to reconcile them back to him. He's trying to um, reinvigorate this relationship with them, that they can actually see that he is their God and he's the one that delivers them and he's the one that sustains them. Um, if you look at if you go all the way back to, I believe it's around Exodus 3, where God speaks to Moses, there's the actual instance where God actually refers to Israel as his firstborn. And the intimate relationship he has with Israel is one he actually wants to have with the world. But when we get to the book of Judges, we see a different scenario here. And, you know, the Israelites have essentially done all these different things to prevent themselves from really flourishing in the way that God has wanted them to. And when we get to the book of Judges, we see this constant recurring theme where God has essentially inspired one judge or another judge. And ironically enough, after that judge has inspired the Israelites to want to worship God more and more, the Israelites go back into this same cycle, literally, reverting back to whatever they were doing. So rather than starting from verse 6, I'm just going to read verse 1, so that we can actually understand the full picture of things. So it starts off by saying, when Ehud was dead, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. This is kind of a recurring theme that happens throughout the whole of Judges. God will send a judge will pronounce or do some great work that will re-inspire Israel to worship God. Once again, they will return back to doing evil in the sight of God. And for anyone that doesn't know who Ehud is an individual that God sent to kill somebody called Eglon, king of the Moabites. And as you can probably see, as kind of a running theme throughout the Bible, Israelites are always underneath some form of oppression, some bigger and greater nation. In this instance, it was the nation of the Moabites. And the Bible specifically says that this king Eglon was something that was I'll say a kind of word. He was quite big boned, or he was quite, and it was a case where Ehud was actually guised himself to go into the palace and basically kill him with use his left to do so. And if we go all the way back down to this particular narrative, which starts off as it being entitled Deborah, we kind of see the very important role that Barak has to play within the story of Deborah, and how his name meaning lightning kind of really helps understand what it is that he did that actually contributed in terms of being faithful to God. I'm going to read from verse 6, and it says, "And she sent and called for Barak, the son of Abinoam, Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, has not the Lord God of Israel commanded, go and deploy troops at Mount Tabor? Take with you 10,000 men of the sons of Naphtali and of the sons of Zebulun, and against you I will deploy Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitude as the river Kishon. I will deliver him into your hand." And Barak said to her, obviously this her being Deborah, "If you will go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not." So just to kind of really put things into perspective, right now the situation is that once again the Israelites have found themselves underneath an oppressive rule of another regime or another government. And this particular group of people that they've literally fallen into captivity with is the king of the Canaanites, whose name is Jabin. He reigned in a place called Thor, and he was commander of an army. And the commander of his army was somebody by the name of Sisera. Essentially, this is the person that was kind of causing stress and distress to the people of Israel at this period of time. I'm just going to read on further. So it says, she said, reading from verse 9, she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, there will be no glory for you in the journey you are taking. The Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. He went up with 10,000 men under his command, and Deborah went up with him. Now Heber the Kenite of the children of Hobab, father-in-law of Moses, had separated himself from the Canaanites and pitched his tent near the terebinth tree at Zabanth, which is beside Kadesh. And they reported to Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoab, had gone up to Mount Tabor. So Sisera gathered together all his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the people who were with him, from Arasheth and Haggayim to the river Keshron. So I'm just going to quickly just explain things as I go along, because obviously it's quite a lot of text to go through. Just kind of set the scene right now. Deborah has consulted with this individual called at this moment in time. And, Barak has essentially made it plain to her that I'm not going to go anywhere. And obviously, Deborah says, I'm going to go. And then it gets to a point where, they've basically been able to, accumulate some form of an army to be able to kind of go against, this vast company of people. Of course, the people that they're facing, there is more of them than there are of Barak and Deborah, and etc. So automatically they're at a disadvantage. And we see obviously from verse 13 where it says that, Sisera basically gathered all of his chariots, and, he had about 900 chariots of iron and all the people who were with him. And, even though it says that, he had 900 chariots, we all know that a chariot is one person, numerous amounts of people. You can imagine throngs and vast groups and amounts of people coming in to basically, essentially just get rid of the Israelites. Then it says in verse 14, then Deborah said to Barak, but this is the day in which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hand. Has not the Lord gone out before you? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. Automatically, we kind of see a bit of a problem here, because Sisera is the person that has the advantage. He has all of these great chariots. For some reason, he decided to tread away on foot and essentially retreat away from the situation. And verse 16, it says, but Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harasheth, Haggayim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. However, Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. But there was peace between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, do not fear. And when he had turned aside with her into the tent, he covered him with a blanket. Then reading verse 13, it says, then he said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. So she opened a jug of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him. And he said to her, stand at the door of the tent, and if any man comes and inquires of you and says, is there any man here? You shall say no. So automatically here we see a bit of a kind of a change in the circumstance. Sisera is basically running for his life. They're trying to get away from the whole situation. They're trying to just get some form of safety, and they found a place to be able to not just have safety, but obviously have a place to, I guess, sleep, have food to eat, and etc. But obviously, unbeknownst to Sisera is the fact that as we'll see later on in the verses, that this is not exactly a place of safety that he's actually been able to reside in. So reading from verse 21, it says, then Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple, and it went down into the ground. He was fast asleep and weary. So he said, so he died. And then verse 22 says, and then as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said to him, come, I will show you the man you seek. And when he went into a tent, there lay Sisera, head of the peg in his temple. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, in the presence of the children of Israel. And the hand of the children of Israel grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. So essentially, I guess you could say the main understanding of this entire story is the fact that they've literally just overcome one regime, and now they're having to overcome another regime in Jabin, the king of Canaan. And unfortunately, it's got to a point where, obviously they're at a great disadvantage in terms of how many people that they have. And of course, it's just a case where, the odds of really not in their favor. But God has, been able to work things within their favor so they can see that not just that it's him that's working through these situations, but so that, God can use people like Barak to basically, allow, these things to transpire. Just briefly, just read Judges chapter 5. It goes into like a song of Deborah where basically just, I guess you could say, praising God for the fact that he was able to deliver the Israelites from this particular scenario. It's quite a long so obviously I'm just going to read the first couple of verses. So I'm just going to read verse 1 and 2. And it says, "Then Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang on that day, saying, when leaders lead in Israel, when the people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord." And in verse 3 it says, "Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. I will sing to the Lord. I will sing praise to the Lord God of Israel." Then verse 4 says, "Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens poured. The clouds also poured water." Essentially, this song is just essentially just singing the praises of God for the fact that he's been able to deliver the Israelites from this unfortunate series of situations. I think what's so striking about this particular passage is that the people that are mentioned, i.e., Barak, they're not. There's nothing great about them. There's nothing distinct about them. But it's the fact that they were just happen to be in the right place at the right time for God to use them in such a remarkable way. And I think the biggest takeaway from us from this particular story is the fact that sometimes in life you're set with certain you're set with scenarios where the odds are not in your favor, where everything seems like it's against you, nothing's really going to work out. But we see with stories like this and stories countless stories throughout the Bible that there's never been a time when the people of God are ever in the majority, or they're ever essentially in a good standing. But even though that is the case, God has still allowed things to work within their favor. And I think that's the biggest takeaway. But I think if we're going to link back to how Barak's meaning of Barak's name being lightning, we look at the first couple of verses that we read. We see the fact that Deborah consulted with Barak, and for me, I feel as if if I'm going to consult with somebody, it's because I know a great deal of information about that person, because that person will definitely be able to help me. So, for example, say I don't know, deciding to look for a new job, and I'm looking for a job in let's say finance. I'm not going to go ahead and go speak to a lawyer. That doesn't make any sense. I'm going to go speak to somebody that's a finance professional. Ideally, somebody that's more trained and has a much vast amount of experience. So I can imagine, the fact that, it says in verse 6, then she sent and called for Barak, the son of Abinoam. The fact that she called for him specifically means that he had some, I guess you could say, some greater depth in being able to actually help treat the situation. And I feel like that's where the meaning of his name really lies in. But it's a case where, they're in a really bad situation. Sisera is the commander of, of Jabin the king. And, I don't know too much about Jabin the king, but just seeing the fact that if in verse 3 it says, "And the children of Israel, so he cried out to the Lord, but Jabin had 900 chariots of iron, and for 20 years he had harshly oppressed the children of Israel." That the story starts off setting the scene, showing the seriousness of the situation. For 20 years they've been suffering. I myself almost 30 years, and I can't imagine the fact that I would have been suffering for 20 whole years in such a bad situation. The fact that God sees the situation they're going through and decides to not just send Deborah the prophetess, but then also decides to actually send Barak, who I guess you could say acts as lightning to I guess you could say inspire Barak and Deborah to act in the situation, is a testimony in and of itself. Biggest takeaway the odds can be against you, whether it be, you know, in terms of your health, in terms of your finances, whatever it may be. But irrespective of that, God will be able to speak a word in that situation and be able to turn things around to be what's in your favor. The next individual I just want to just quickly just look at is an individual that I think all of us are much, much more familiar with. And obviously, for that reason, I feel like we probably have more things to add. But before I even move on to that, did anyone have anything else to add? Any contribution, maybe any question for that matter? All right, if no one else had any contribution, any question, I think we'll just move on. I just wouldn't assume that based on you guys, either you guys are understanding what I'm saying, but we'll move on. All right, so moving on to Samson now, someone that we probably all know quite a bit about. So the Samson's name is obviously, it's a Hebrew name, and the meaning of his name is of the sun. And oh, sorry, see, there's a comment. Okay, all right. Yeah, the Hebrew, the Hebrew meaning of Samson's name is of the sun. And you know, for anyone that's, you know, studies science at some point in stage in life, because you know, science is one of the subjects that as a compulsory subject as well, English and maths. You know, we all know the fact that the sun has a very important role to play within the whole of our. And we know the sun is obviously one of the biggest stars out there. It's not the biggest star, you know, there obviously are other stars that are bigger, but it's one of the biggest stars that we know of. And we know that, you know, the Earth itself orbits it. And we know that it's also one of the reasons why we have 365 days in a year and 366 days in a leap year. Before I just go any further, does anyone want to just maybe shed some more light on that? Because even though I know a bit about science, I don't know everything. So does anyone want to just shed a bit more light on that? All right, if no one else had anything else to say on that, we'll just steadily move on then. All right, so there's a couple of passages I just want us to read, and the reason why is because I feel like, especially compared to Barak, Samson's story is kind of explored at great length. I feel like it's because of the fact that he wasn't really actually making himself useful to the Lord all the way throughout his life, and obviously that kind of links onto what you think, Courtney, where speaking, when you think of faith, when you think of somebody trusting and, you know, believing in God and making sure they were doing what God asks, Samson's not really the first person that comes to mind. And as we go through these passages, you're going to be able to see how it is that even though he didn't exactly, you know, fulfill the calling that God asked him to in the way that God asked him to do so, still was a case where God used him in a powerful way, regardless of him not always actually listening and heeding to what that God had given him. So starting off from Judges chapter 13, verse 24. Actually, we'll read Judges chapter 13, verse 1, just to really be able to set the scene once again. So Judges chapter 13, verse 1, it says, "Again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years." So once again, we see the children of Israel just genuinely have not learned their lesson. Once again, they found themselves under bondage of another nation. And in this instance, it's underneath the nation of the Philistines, and it's for 40 years. And, you know, if you know much about, you know, the story of like David and Goliath and everything, we know that the Philistines are called people for the Israelites have to deal with. And, you know, later on in the passage going on in the whole of Judges 13 all the way to the end of it, talks about an individual by the name of Manoah, and talks about the fact that, you know, he had a barren wife, she didn't have any children. But even though that was the case, God, you know, sent a what do you call it, angel to her. This angel of the Lord is obviously, of course, referring to Jesus. And it was there where the angel literally prophesied and said, "You're going to bear a son." And the son, you know, the son has to do specific things, you know, specific things you can't do, and one that has to do specific things as well. So it talks about the fact that, you know, she's not allowed to wine, she has to have a specific diet. And it also talks about the fact that, you know, the child should be a Nazarite, and that, you know, he will actually deliver the Israelite out of the hands of the Philistines. So going on to verse 24, which basically announcement of Samson's birth, it says, the woman bore a son called his name Samson. The child grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the spirit of the Lord began to come upon him at Mahane, and between Zorah and Eshtaol. So reading on from Judges chapter 14, verse 1 to 2, and it says, now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. Now, automatically here, like, I don't know what's taking place between Judges chapter 13, verse 24 and Judges chapter 14, verse 1. But we can obviously ascertain the fact that in one passage, Samson is a baby. In another passage, Samson is clearly a full man. Something must have happened in between these two verses for Samson to literally just go completely against what it is that God actually called him to do. Because as you know, God called Samson to be the deliverer of the Israelites from the Philistines. He didn't actually ask him to fraternize with the Philistines in any manner. But for some reason, Samson, the very first verse after he's been born has specifically said Samson's found a woman that he thinks is desirable, and has actually gone to his parents and said, can you set this up? Would you allow me to be able to marry her? If you go to verse 3, before I even go to the other verses, rightly so, the father and mother asks a very good question. It says, then his father and mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of all of the daughters of your brethren, or among all my people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? And it says, and Samson said to his father, for she pleases me well. And then afterwards, it talks about the fact that it says, but his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. For at that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. I guess this kind of provides a bit more explanation, but at the same time, it doesn't really make much sense. I believe there's a saying that goes out there that, you don't need to compromise in order to be able to make sure that you are able to effectively reach somebody wherever they are. And it makes complete sense, because in you compromising, you're losing a part of yourself. And then you losing a part of yourself, essentially, lowering your standards and lowering your ability to be used by God in as an effective manner. So even though, of course, we see that him trying to find a wife as a Philistine is a means to an end, it's still obviously quite a precarious and quite a difficult situation for him to actually allow himself to go into, because when you think about it, it's so dangerous for somebody to actually think that they can actually put themselves in such a position where they'll be able to be used by God in such a way, even though there obviously is a strong inclination that the Spirit of the Lord will not actually be with them. So going on to Judges chapter 16, verse 1 to 2, 16 verse 1 to 5. Before I even go on to that, anyone have anything else to add before I move on?
No, you're good, Kingsley.
Okay, no problem. All right, so before I even go into Judges chapter 16, verse 1 to 5, I feel like I just need to just kind of just glance over what happens in between. So obviously, Samson, has decided to find a Philistine wife, and he's essentially got this wife because he's trying to use this opportunity to be able to cause some form of destruction with the Philistine. And then if we fast forward to chapter 15, it says we see it's in chapter Samuel defeats the Philistines. So it's the case where he's had an encounter with the Philistines and has been able to get rid of quite a great deal of them, and he's been able to do it with very simple means. If we fast forward to Judges chapter 16, verse 1 to 5, this is where I believe the narrative gets really, really interesting, but very, very confusing at the same time. And I think it's a story that all of us are very much familiar with. I mean, even if you're not even somebody that even believes much in the Bible, everyone has most likely heard of the story of Samson and Delilah at some point in time. Reading from Judges chapter 16, verse 1 to 5, and it says, now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. And the Gazites were told, Samson has come here. They surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. Were quiet all night saying in the morning, when it is daylight, we will kill him. Verse 3. And Samson lay low till midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gates of the city and the two gateposts, pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Afterward, it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of. So I don't even feel like I even need to explain this, but I'm going to explain this for the sake of us being able to understand the situation. So the story of Samson has already started with him deciding to actually take a wife take a Philistine as a wife. That's already a no-no. But now in Judges chapter 16, verse 1, we find him in a very, very serious situation where he's decided to go into the Philistine land once again and, fraternize with women, sleep with them. And now he's gotten himself in a situation where the Philistines think to themselves, we've got this guy cornered. We can take him out. We just need to make sure that things just work in our favor. He's obviously, of course, been able to outsmart the situation and been able to get out of it scot-free. I really want to just dwell in Judges 16 verse 1. So because when I preached about this topic the other day, even I would start to actually see what I actually saw. So if you understand much about the land of the Philistines, if you look at where Gaza is in relation to the actual place where the Philistines dwelled, you would understand that Gaza is in the uttermost area of Philistine. It's not a case where it's on the outskirts around the border. It's deep within Philistine. It's deep within the place where the Philistines reside. So that means that Samson was essentially going to the furthest part possible to dwell with the Philistines. And obviously, he's been asked by God specifically to actually just get rid of the Philistines. He hasn't been asked to fraternize with them. He hasn't been asked to even have a conversation with them. And for some reason, he's put himself in this precarious position and obviously still asking for the blessing of God to still be with him, despite that being the case. But one thing we find so interesting is that even after he's had that experience, you would have thought to himself, okay, Samson, you've messed up a couple of times, let me give you the benefit of the doubt. Surely by now, you must realize that, you're probably biting off a bit more than you can chew. But then in verse 4, we see something that just puzzles me even more, where he's basically just, gone to a vineyard and has now found this woman called Delilah. And, he's essentially fallen in love with this woman. Don't know what he's found attractive about her, but he's fallen in love with her. I remember, I think all of us probably were in the AY that I talked about this. When I found out the meaning of the meaning of the name of Delilah, I thought to myself, my God, what was Samson doing with this person? But I don't know if anyone remembers what I actually said about the meaning of the name. Does anyone remember what I said the meaning of the name Delilah is? Did anyone remember? It's not a trick question if you don't remember.
I don't remember it, so I'm not gonna lie.
Right. So for anyone that doesn't remember or doesn't know, the name Delilah literally means consumer. It literally means consumer, and we all know that there's no way to look at that name and think to ourselves that's a good thing. That in itself is a bad thing. I mean, my name means King's Meadow. I mean, I don't know what you guys' names mean, but the fact that this woman's name literally means the consumer means that she's not coming to do something good. And Samson's name meaning of the son, it's like, what do you possibly think you can get from this woman? But if we go through the whole of Judges chapter 16, we see that the Judges 16 is very different, not only because of the way it ends, also because of what's happened in the previous chapters. We see the fact that Samson is literally constantly being spoken to by Delilah, and Delilah is constantly asking Samson, where do you get your strength from? I don't understand how it happens. I mean, what makes you so strong? And obviously Samson's just teasing her, just saying, oh, I get it from this. And obviously that's clearly not where he gets it from. And it gets to the point where, Delilah starts to become so vexed with him, where she literally just says, you know what? I've had enough. I'm just going to leave you if you don't tell me what it is that where your strength lies. But obviously, he's not really aware of the fact that Samson's actually, Samson's not really aware of the fact that Delilah's put on his life on purpose so that the Philistines can draw him out and actually just get rid of him altogether. And you see, when we go down to verse 23, which is unfortunately passage, which unfortunately the passage is actually entitled Samson dies of the Philistines, we see that the situation has literally just increased tenfold. So reading from verse 23, and it says, "Now the lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god, and to rejoice. And they said, our God has delivered into our hands Samson our enemy. When the people saw him, they praised their God. They said, our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who multiplied our dead. So it happened when their hearts were merry that they said, call for Samson that he may perform for us. So they called for Samson from the prison and he performed for them, and they stationed him between the pillars." Can you just imagine this? Samson has been instilled by God as a judge for the Israelites, and he's gotten himself in this situation where he's not supposed to be there. And now it's gotten to the point where the very people he's supposed to be, getting rid of, or supposed to be, I guess you could say, witnessing to them, because not just necessarily a case where God obviously only wanted them to be eliminated. It's a case where God was actually trying to actually reveal his will to them. He's actually been told, perform. And, there is no setting in which you can look at that where human beings are asked to perform, apart from the fact that he's essentially just been made to be a slave at this time. And we see in verse 26, it says, "Then Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars which support the people so that I can lean on them." Now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, about 3,000 men and women on the roof, watching while Samson performed. Then Samson called to the Lord, saying, "O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, that just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my two eyes." And Samson took hold of the two middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one on his right and the other on his left. Then Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed in his life. And his brothers and his fathers and all his father's households came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Torah and Eshtal in the tomb of his father Manoah. He had judged Israel 20 years. So, just to kind of really put things into perspective, obviously this is quite a sad way for, any individual story to end. I guess the greatest takeaway from the story is that even though it wasn't, I'm guessing, not even I'm guessing, it definitely wasn't the way God envisioned for Samson to actually be able to judge Israel. But even though that wasn't the case, he still somewhat, was able to fulfill his mission. I think what is beautiful about this story, even though it doesn't seem like there's much beauty to be found in, is the fact that even though Samson has gone as far as possible to not listen to the Lord, God has still found some form of use for him. God has still been able to work within his life to still be able to actually, I guess you could say, fulfill the purpose that he actually called him to. And that's that for that very reason, I feel like that's the reason why the stories of both Barak and Samson really resonate with us quite a lot, because faith is one of those things where, yes, usually you think to yourself, when you look at, instances of people practice faith, you think of people that have been able to, maybe walk on water, who've been able to, heal, what do you call it, the broken hearted, be able to, heal the sick, heal the lame, heal the people that can't see, and all these different things. But it may also just be a case where, God is also, actually looking at the people that have not necessarily done things that are, the routine or the norm. And we see with both the stories of Barak and Samson that they're both individuals who, even though, they're not mighty, they're not really strong in anything that they're doing, God has been able to use them in a great way. So I guess the biggest takeaway, or the last thing I just want to leave with you, or just to summarize everything that's been said today, is that, you know what? God is calling us all to a deeper purpose. God is bigger than any situation that we'll ever face in our lives. And that's the reason why in Proverbs 3:5-6, it says, "Trust the Lord with all your heart and lean upon your understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path." And for anyone that's been studying the collegiate quarterly, we know that we've been looking at the book of James, and it says that, faith without works is dead. But this faith that we need to have is the faith that essentially is built on, as it says in Hebrews 11 verse 1, substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And it's a case where unless we fully and completely have faith in Jesus Christ to do all these marvelous things for our life, there's no way we'll be able to actually live the greater, deeper and rich purpose that he has in mind. So that's, I guess, the final thing I wanted to say with you all for today. Did anyone have anything else to add before we close the study for today?
No, I just wanted to say it's just interesting to hear about Barak's story and how he relates into the topic of faith. And it's nice to learn something new.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, I feel like that's the reason why this faith chapter is so interesting, because it's the stories in the Bible that we constantly overlook. We don't realize how, I guess you could say, this blessings in store for us. And I think that's the main reason I wanted to kind of start this series, because even though some of the individuals we've gone weren't specifically named, in the instance, of course, of Joshua, these people are actually people of was able to do great feats, but the great feats they were able to do had nothing to do with themselves. It was just because they completely relied on Jesus and on God and to be able to work. But if no one else has anything else to add, just close in a word of prayer. No one else had anything else to add. Does anyone else have anything else to add? A word of prayer, Adam. All right. Heavenly Father, I'd like to thank you, Lord, for just blessing us yet again with another opportunity to be able to just delve in your word again. You've shown us through the stories of Barak and Samson that faith is such an important thing within our life. It's literally supposed to be substance, and I guess you could say the very way that we actually build our relationship with you. And so I'm asking, Lord, that you be with us all, Lord, regardless of whatever situation we find ourselves in, Lord. Whether it may be any situations with our finances, our relationships, or even our career, Lord. But even on a deeper level, Lord, even our relationship with you, Lord, I ask you, Lord, you inspire us, you encourage us, and you strengthen us to realize that you are just one prayer away. You are literally just one sentence away. That we really need to be able to take hold of not just your work, take hold of you whilst you may be found. Continue to be with us all on this study, Lord, and I pray, Lord, you richly bless us. Help us to really understand the great truths that you have hidden within your word, Lord, even as we are currently in this type of hours. You us throughout the rest of the Sabbath day and forgive us for anything the trespass may have committed against. Please now I pray all these things. Amen.